For over 2 decades, the specter of a cataclysmic ground war in Europe loomed large, a cold dread that shaped geopolitical strategy and propelled an arms race of unprecedented scale. At the heart of this confrontation stood two titans of armored warfare, America's M1 Abrams and the Soviet Union's T-72 main battle tank. These machines were not merely weapons. They were the physical embodiment of two diametrically opposed engineering philosophies and military doctrines. In the West, the M1 Abrams represented a commitment to technological overmatch, crew survivability, and battlefield dominance. In the East, the T-72 epitomized a doctrine of overwhelming numerical superiority, production simplicity, and relentless offense. The central terrifying question that defined NATO's existence was what would transpire when these two titans finally met. Would the American thoroughbred be able to withstand the iron avalanche of Soviet mass? This is the story of that impending collision. We will dissect the engineering decisions and doctrinal imperatives that shaped both the M1 Abrams and the T-72. We will reconstruct the 2 decades of fear and strategic uncertainty that preceded their encounter, a period when the T-72 was feared as an invincible monster. Finally, we will analyze the brutal, decisive, and ultimately one-sided desert showdown of 1991, which provided a definitive answer to the Cold War's most pressing military question. The encounter in the desert would reveal a chasm in engineering and a fundamental disparity in doctrine that would redefine armored warfare. It was a confrontation not just of steel and fire, but of entirely different visions for modern combat.
To truly comprehend the outcome of the Desert War, one must first understand the foundational philosophies that drove the design of both the M1 Abrams and the T-72. For more than 2 decades, the Cold War was a standoff not only of superpowers, but of opposing engineering philosophies crystallized in steel. The central, terrifying question that defined NATO's strategy was what would happen when these two titans finally met. The T-72 was the physical embodiment of Soviet post-war doctrine, victory through overwhelming mass and a high-tempo offensive. First entering service in 1973, the T-72 was not merely a tank, it was a strategic concept. Its design philosophy prioritized quantity over complexity. Tens of thousands poured off Soviet production lines, a figure that formed the very foundation of NATO's strategic tank gap fear. In NATO nightmares and Soviet war games alike, this iron avalanche was aimed squarely at a single strategic corridor, the Fulda Gap in West Germany. Scenarios envisioned a high-speed, overwhelming swarm of T-72s piercing NATO defenses and reaching the English Channel in a week. To achieve this, the T-72's design was a deliberate tool-built solution. Its relatively light weight of 41.5 to 44.5 tons was a specific doctrinal choice. It provided high strategic mobility, enabling the tank to cross the numerous river bridges in Central Europe that heavier tanks could not. This concept of T-72 simplicity is, however, often misunderstood. While cost-effective, with unit costs as low as $0.5 million, it was not necessarily cheaper to manufacture than its more complex Soviet counterpart, the T-64. Instead, its simplicity lay in its operational use. It was a workhorse that was far more reliable and easier for a vast conscript-based army to operate. This total focus on offense, however, introduced critical design trade-offs. Built for speed and mass, not finesse or comfort, the tank was a hunter that was deeply vulnerable when it became the hunted. This flaw would be brutally exposed in 1991 when Saddam Hussein's Iraqi forces lacking the advanced optics and fire control of top-tier Soviet models, were forced to fight a static defensive war. The T-72's entire design was dictated by its single greatest engineering innovation, the automatic loader. This mechanical system performed the role of a human loader, retrieving a 125mm round and ramming it into the breech. The gun itself was the massive 125mm 2A4 smoothbore cannon. The autoloader's primary benefit was the elimination of the fourth crew member, with a crew reduced to 3: commander, gunner, driver. Soviet designers were free to create a tank with a very small silhouette. This resulted in the T-72's iconic, tiny, low-profile cast steel turret. This made the tank an incredibly small target, perfectly aligning with the Soviet survivability model of "don't be seen, don't be hit." However, the autoloader's design required two-piece ammunition. The propellant charge and the projectile were stored and loaded separately. This mechanical requirement placed a hard limit on the length of the projectile that could be loaded. In armored warfare, the penetrating power of an APF SDS round, a kinetic energy dart, is largely a function of its length. By requiring a shorter, two-part projectile, the T-72's autoloader inherently crippled the ultimate kinetic energy potential of its main gun. The very innovation that gave the T-72 its small size also neutered its sword. Furthermore, the T-72's fire control system, FCS, while advanced for its time, was a collection of parts rather than a single integrated system. Critically, the ballistic computer required manual input for a firing solution. In a high-stress engagement, this meant the T-72 gunner would be scrambling to input data, while his American counterpart would simply laze and fire. This created a massive and fatal gap in time to kill. The M1 Abrams, conceived in the 1970s and fielded in 1980, was a direct philosophical counterpoint to the T-72. It was not built for mass, but for overmatch. It was not designed to be expendable, but to ensure its crew survived. The Abrams' guiding philosophy was crew survivability, advanced electronics, and battlefield sustainability. This philosophy was also an economic one. The Abrams was and is incredibly expensive. At a cost of over $3 million per unit by the mid-1980s, this price disparity was not a bug. It was a feature. It reflected the fundamental difference between a conscript-based expendable Soviet doctrine and a smaller, professional, all-volunteer NATO force. In the American doctrine, the highly trained crew was the invaluable asset, not the tank. The Abrams, therefore, was a desperate, high-tech, and expensive response to the feared, documented advantage of the T-72 in its era. The 20-year fear of the T-72 was not only real, it was a core driver of Western policy.
The M1's hunter-killer doctrine was made possible by two revolutionary technologies, its shield and its sword. The shield was the M1's revolutionary armor, an armored fortress born from Western ingenuity and fear. It was an American-developed composite system inspired by the groundbreaking British Chobham armor. This was a lasagna of ceramic tiles encased within a metal framework, engineered to defeat the two primary anti-tank threats: shaped charges, heat, and kinetic penetrators, APFSDS. By 1988, this shield was made even stronger. The M1A1HA, or heavy armor variant, incorporated layers of depleted uranium, DU, into the armor matrix, massively increasing its density. The M1's lethality came from integration. It combined the TIS, a laser rangefinder, and
a digital ballistic computer. The gunner would simply place his reticle on the thermal glowing target and laze it. The computer would instantaneously and automatically calculate the ballistic solution. This enabled first-shot kills at ranges well beyond 3,000 meters. This entire system, seeing without being seen and killing on the first shot, was the sword that made the M1 a true hunter-killer. No single design choice better illustrates the chasm between the two philosophies than their method of storing ammunition. This critical flaw would prove catastrophic for the T-72. The T-72's autoloader stored ammunition in a carousel ring at the bottom of the fighting compartment, directly under the crew. If the tank's armor was penetrated, the resulting spall or heat could cause a sympathetic detonation of this densely packed ammunition. This leads to the T-72's most infamous vulnerability, the jack-in-the-box effect. The massive overpressure from the exploding ammunition would violently blow the entire turret, weighing several tons, clean off the chassis, resulting in a catastrophic, non-survivable event. The flaw, however, is even more damning. The carousel itself only held approximately 22 rounds. The T-72 carried an additional 17 or more loose rounds stored unprotected inside the crew compartment. It is this unprotected spare ammunition that often acted as the primary ignition source. The M1's designers understood this risk and engineered a direct solution. All main gun ammunition was stored in a separate, heavily armored compartment in the rear of the turret, sealed off from the crew by sliding blast doors. The roof of this ammunition compartment was intentionally designed with blowout panels. The contrast is perfect. The T-72's design assumes it will not be penetrated, prioritizing a low profile. The M1's design assumes penetration is inevitable, prioritizing saving the crew. The M1 was designed to be mission-killed but survivable, allowing its crew to be recovered. The T-72 was designed to be lethal until the very moment it was lethally hit, resulting in the total loss of both crew and machine. The 1991 Gulf War would ultimately expose the T-72 as a paper tiger, but for 20 years prior, it was perceived by NATO as an invincible monster, and this fear was not hyperbole. The strategic terror NATO felt was born from the T-72's perceived quality, combined with its undeniable quantity. This was the tank gap. Western analysts looked at a massive Soviet war machine that comprised tens of thousands of tanks, a force that outnumbered the American tank arsenal by 5 to 1. This force was physically arrayed against the Fulda Gap. The Soviet doctrine was not attrition, but a swarm. The psychological weight of this threat is best captured in the dark gallows humor of U.S. troops stationed there. One anecdote recalls troops being told their job was to die in the Fulda Gap, to function as a speed bump just long enough for NATO to go nuke. This demonstrates that the T-72's mass was itself a strategic weapon. It created a gap in NATO's conventional doctrine so profound that it forced the West to rely on tactical nuclear weapons as its only credible deterrent. The T-72's pre-war reputation was the consensus of Western intelligence. Declassified documents paint a chilling picture of a tank NATO believed could roll to the Rhine in days. A secret 1980 U.S. Army study titled U.S. Intelligence and Soviet Armor stated the case in unambiguous terms. the U.S. Army rates the best current Soviet tank clearly superior to its main battle. A 1979 CIA comparison chart confirms this dire assessment. It gives the T-72 a superior rating over the M60 in protection, fire control, and main gun. The M60 was deemed significantly inferior. Analysts concluded the M60's 105mm gun was not guaranteed to penetrate the T-72's turret at all. This is the most critical element of the M1 versus T-72 story. The paper tiger narrative is a retrospective one. The M1, therefore, was not merely an upgrade, it was a desperate, high-tech response to the perceived and documented threat of the T-72. The 20-year fear was not only real, it was correct. This set the stage for the great unknown of the 1980s. On one side, the newly fielded M1 Abrams, the thoroughbred. It was technologically superior, but untested and expensive. On the other side, the T-72, the workhorse. It was fast and hard-hitting, cheap, and numerically overwhelming. The big question of the Cold War was which philosophy would prevail. Could the M1's first-shot kill technology achieve the 10-to-1 kill ratio required to win? Or would America's few expensive thoroughbreds be swarmed? For 20 years, the answer was a terrifying unknown.
In August 1990, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. In January 1991, Operation Desert Storm began. The 20-year big question was about to be answered, not in the Fulda Gap, but in the deserts of Iraq. The showdown was not, however, a fair fight. It was a double mismatch. America brought its absolute best, while Iraq fielded a downgraded export model. America's tank, the M1A1HA. The United States deployed the upgraded M1A1, and critically, the M1A1HA, or heavy armor. This HA variant had received an emergency upgrade, which included the integration of depleted uranium layers into its armor. Iraq's tank, the T-72M Monkey model. Iraq's elite Republican Guard was not equipped with the Soviet Union's top-of-the-line models. They were equipped with the T-72M and T-72M1, downgraded export versions, and the locally assembled Assad Babu, or Lion of Babylon. These monkey models had simplified armor and simpler sights and fire control. They looked like Soviet steel, but they weren't the real thing. The battle was decided by metallurgy before the first shot was fired. Iraqi sword was made of outdated steel. Iraqi T-72s were firing horrifically outdated ammunition. Their best APFSDS rounds were from the 3VPM series, early-generation steel penetrators that were, by 1991 standards, woefully insufficient. They could penetrate a maximum of approximately 340 millimeters of rolled, homogeneous armor at 2,000 meters. America's DU armor. The M1A1HA's frontal armor, enhanced with depleted uranium, was estimated to provide protection equivalent to approximately 600 millimeters of RHA. America's sword was the DU Silver Bullet. The M1A1HA was firing the M829A1. This was a state-of-the-art, long-rod penetrator made of depleted uranium. Its depleted uranium spear was engineered to shatter the myth of invincibility. The physics were a foregone conclusion. The Iraqi sword had a maximum penetration power of approximately 340 millimeters. The American shield had a protection value of approximately 600 millimeters. The math is simple and absolute. 340 is less than 600. The T-72's main gun could not penetrate the M1's frontal armor. This was the climax, the real-life showdown where the two philosophies finally met. The scene was February 26, 1991.
The U.S. 2 Armored Cavalry Regiment, or 2ACR, was advancing east. A massive sandstorm hit. Visibility for the naked eye was near zero. At approximately 4:18 p.m., Eagle Troop, commanded by Captain H.R. McMaster, crested a small rise. They stumbled directly into the defensive line of an Iraqi T-72 tank brigade. This was the real-world test of the very systems that defined these two tanks. Iraqi blindness. The Iraqis were firing nearly blind. Their active IR sights were useless. Their infrared light from their searchlights simply reflected off the opaque atmosphere of sand, blinding their own sensors. American vision. For the M1 Abrams passive thermal sights, the sand and smoke were transparent. McMaster's own after-action report is definitive. He peered through the M1's thermal sight and saw a line of glowing Iraqi tanks, completely unaware that the 2nd ACR was on their flank. The result was a massacre. It was not a battle, it was an execution by sensor. McMaster's gunner saw the T-72s at 1,420 meters. His tank destroyed 3 T-72s in just under 8 seconds. The 9 M1 tanks of Eagle Troop fanned out, destroying T-72s at ranges of 2,500 to 3,000 meters, far beyond the range at which the T-72s could even see them. The hunter-killer philosophy had worked so perfectly that it prevented the brute force philosophy from ever being brought to bear. The statistics of the engagement are so lopsided they border on the absurd, providing the definitive, brutal answer to the 20-year question. The stat. In the larger battle of 73 Easting, the 2ACR destroyed 159 enemy tanks and 260 other vehicles. The zero. The 2ACR's losses to enemy tank fire were zero. This statistic held for the entire war. A January 1992 U.S. GAO report made it official. The enemy destroyed no Abrams tanks during the Persian Gulf War. Most telling of all are the after-action reports and crew testimonies from those who were hit. A GAO report cites one incident in which an Abrams was reportedly struck twice by a T-72. It noted, one projectile had bounced off the tank and the other had embedded itself in the armor. The single most dramatic anecdote involves an M1A1HA that had become mired in mud and was attacked by 3 T-72s. The final T-72 closed to 400 meters, point-blank range, and fired a solid shot or sabot round. According to the crew, the round left a groove in the M1A1's frontal armor and bounced off. The M1A1, still stuck, proceeded to destroy all 3 T-72s. Soldiers swore they saw shells glance off the Abrams like stones on water. The testimony, whether literal physics or the fog of war, became legend and the ultimate validation of the M1's shield.
The battles of 1991 provided a brutal and definitive answer to the 20-year Cold War debate, leaving behind visceral proof of one design's failure and another's resounding success. The battlefields of 1991 were littered with the visceral, visual proof of the T-72's design failure. Declassified photos show Iraqi T-72s with their turrets blown completely off the chassis, often landing dozens of feet away. This was the jack-in-the-box effect. It was not a random occurrence. It was the direct result of the carousel autoloader and the unprotected spare ammunition, a catastrophic, built-in design flaw. The M1's M829A1 silver bullet didn't just kill the T-72, it exploited its deepest engineering vulnerability. This became the visual symbol of a philosophical failure. Each turret-tossed T-72 was a testament to a design that had sacrificed survivability. This stood in stark contrast to the M1's blowout panels, a feature designed to prevent this exact event. The 1991 Showdown in the Desert provided the brutal, definitive answer. The Iraqi T-72, the export model of a tank feared for 2 decades as an invincible monster, was exposed. A feared beast revealed to be a hollow threat, at least in the desert. It was, however, a hollow threat because it was confronted by a dragon built specifically to hunt it, the M1 A1HA. The American hunter-killer philosophy was proven overwhelmingly superior to the Soviet brute force philosophy. This was not simply a victory of a better gun or thicker armor. It was the victory of an integrated system over a collection of parts. The hunter, the M1's passive thermal sights, allowed it to find its prey in the blindness of a sandstorm. The killer, the M1's integrated ballistic computer, allowed it to achieve first-shot kills from over a mile away. The shield, the M1's DU-enhanced armor, allowed it to ignore the enemy's return fire. And survival, the M1's blowout panels, ensured its crews lived to fight on, while the T-72's catastrophic design flaw ensured its crews did not. The 20-year debate over quality versus quantity was over. Quality had won, and the victory was absolute.